Did a company bring back the dire wolf? Is it de-extincted? I guess is the question. That's the big question around everything. And I know you're thinking, Andrew, this is an ocean podcast. Like, why are we talking about wolves in this? Well, one, wolves are cool. We always love to talk about that. I'm a Game of Thrones fan, so dire wolves, obviously a great topic to discuss on an ocean podcast. But what we're going to be talking about today on this episode is we're going to be looking at the questions surrounding like bringing back species. Is it a good idea to, first of all, de-extinct? Is it an actual dire wolf species? And what are the implications for the ocean? That's what we're going to be talking about on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to this exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, and this is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. On today's episode, we have a great one for you. We have Dr. Gabby Mastromonaco, who is here today from the Toronto Zoo. She is the chief scientist at the zoo, and she's also in charge of the cryogenic bank at the zoo, where they actually have sperm and embryos from over 400 different species of animals that are at the zoo and outside the zoo to help preserve genetic diversity. Now, I asked her on the podcast not only to talk about that because it works well with the dire wolf thing, because we're talking about genetics, but I wanted to get her opinions, her scientific opinions, about what has happened with this news about bringing back and de-extincting the dire wolf. Is it a dire wolf? Is it considered a dire wolf? And why are scientists so obsessed about saying, hey, you know what? It's not a dire wolf. Why are we so worried about that? And also, does it matter in the whole context of things? Then we're going to ask the question, hey, what are the implications for conservation? Are they actually going to release these species? What if they get out from their enclosure right now? We're talking about woolly mammoths coming back. There's a lot of questions that we have to answer. And I wanted to get Gabby on because she has the expertise to talk about it. She has the knowledge of this. She's read the papers, she's written papers. And I think it's really important that we get somebody with the expertise on the podcast to talk about it. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. I can't wait for you to listen to this interview with Dr. Gabby Mastromonaco from the Toronto Zoo. Enjoy, and I will talk to you after. Hey, Gabby, welcome to the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Are you ready to talk about genetics and de-extinction?
Hi, Andrew. Yes, I am. Thank you for having me here today.
You bet. Now, this is a lot of fun. This is the first time I've had, Gabby, this is the first time I've had you on this podcast, but we have a bit of a history. I interviewed you for the Wild for Life podcast, the Toronto Zoo podcast a couple of years ago. That was a lot of fun. We talked about a little bit what we're going to be talking about today, talking about the Toronto Zoo's work with the cryogenics lab and the work with preserving genetic diversity, and in some cases, producing animals from in vitro fertilization. We're going to talk about your work on that because it's groundbreaking. It's a lot of fun to talk about. But I asked you on the podcast today because obviously the news has been flooded with this idea of de-extinction. And with these dire wolves or gray wolves that have been genetically altered, however you want to see it or however it's been presented, has just dominated the news in a news cycle that's been pretty bleak lately with the economy and everything like that. So it really brought attention. It's a lot of topic of a lot of conversation among scientists and among the public. So what I wanted to do is have you on, since you have such great experience in this research area, and I want to get your thoughts on the idea of de-extinction and of course repopulation of these animals that have been coming into play. So we're going to talk all about that, which I can't wait to get into. But before we do, Gabby, can you just let us know who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. So I'm Gabby Mastromonaco. I'm the Chief Science Officer at Toronto Zoo and also the reproductive biologist for the zoo. So I'm in this really unique and lucky privileged position where I not only get to focus on the reproductive science that is being done at the zoo, but my position has grown a little bit to look over all the sciences. So animal well-being, health, welfare, nutrition, and of course, reproduction and the field teams, the species recovery teams. So because it's working together that we can do good things.
And this is what I love about the zoo. When I started podcasting for you guys, I really learned about that like the zoo is not just a place where you go and look at animals. That's just one aspect of it. What I like to call it is it's a conservation organization. It's a facility that facilitates the conservation of the animals, not only that you house, but other animals locally and so forth, and have programs with the community, have programs really all around the world. And that's what I love about the zoo. And so I really appreciate the work that you do, and congratulations on the expansion of that position that you were in. Much well deserved. And I know that they are going to be, the people there are going to be, not only the members of the zoo, but also the people who are there for the zoo, the staff and stuff that are going to enjoy what you do. And so I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. And I know I asked you last minute to come on because we're going to talk about this idea for de-extinction. But what I want to first get into is just kind of give an idea of what you do, like the cryogenics lab and the purpose of the cryogenics lab at the zoo. Can you tell us a little bit about sort of like a brief history of like how it started, why it started, and then what you do with all the things at the cryogenics lab?
So you've hit on one of my favorite topics, and I'll try to be succinct about it. But so obviously, Toronto Zoo has the only reproductive science program in a zoo in Canada, and so I mean, preserving genetic diversity can be done in a number of different ways. We can naturally breed animals and release them into the wild, but at Toronto Zoo, we also use alternative strategies, which is assisted reproduction as well. And because we work with artificial insemination, in vitro fertilization, producing embryos, but the most important thing of all of that is that we can freeze them as well. Mm-hmm. So storing in liquid nitrogen means that genetic material that is present today can be captured forever. As long as we monitor those tanks and look after them, we could take the snapshots in time of the species that are around. So our biobank is 40 years old. I'm trying to do the math in my head.
40 years old.
40
That's
years
incredible.
Old, 1980, right? Just over 40 years old. And we've been diligently not only cryopreserving samples from our own animals, we support zoos across Canada, and of course samples from the wild. That's the new area that we need to get into and have started working on.
Now, when we talk about this genetic material, like this DNA that's preserved, we're talking about intact DNA. Like this is not just DNA that's taken from a fossil or taken from something that was, died, 10,000 years ago or plus. We're talking about things that like DNA material that's intact that have been taken over the last 40 years, because that's how long, within that time span. So like if you were to unfreeze it, and obviously I'm simplifying the process here, but if you were to unfreeze some of that genetic material would be intact if you want to use it, correct?
So that is the important distinction. There's a lot of wildlife biobanks around the world. Our amazing Canadian Museum of Nature has Canada's Biodiversity Biobank. But when you're thinking of that DNA, whether it's ancestral or modern DNA, it's just frozen dead material. So you can get DNA out of it. But the cryobank or biobank at the Toronto Zoo has living cells, living sperm, living embryos, living skin cells from which we can just take DNA to sequence it or whatever we want to do with it. But we can also create offspring. So with that, that nice, clean, modern, living cells that are frozen away, we can apply the reproductive technologies that are available to us.
That's amazing. If we just talk about the Bison program, because this is something that I brag to people about, because I'm so proud not only to be from Toronto, but to be Canadian, to say like, hey, this has happened locally. And it's not an easy thing to do. It's just something that takes years and years of research. But can you talk about the program and what it's been able to accomplish?
It's been a long go. We started 2007, 2008. So we're looking at over 15 years of really methodical and diligent trials, not only at Toronto Zoo, but this is a really important partnership with University of Saskatchewan and Parks Canada. And of course, partnerships and collaboration are the foundation of good research and good conservation. So, we were interested in the challenges that were happening in the wild with the disease issue. Of course, there's some really genetically valuable animals that have tuberculosis, brucellosis. And we knew that we could take sperm, embryos, we can hopefully disinfect them of those diseases and bank clean genetics. So clean living sperm and embryos that can be used in the future to repopulate these disease-free herds. And there's been a couple of really important firsts that come out of this project. But of course, at Toronto Zoo a few years ago, you might remember, we had a calf born, a bison calf born from sperm that had been frozen for 35 years. And
That's
is
amazing.
The oldest like living sperm frozen
Right.
that resulted in a live calf from artificial insemination.
So, and that would mean, again, just to simplify, that would mean, so you took that sperm from 35 years ago, you inseminated it into an embryo, and then a bison, like a female bison, carried that fetus and then gave birth. Is that correct?
Yeah, so in this case, we didn't make the embryo in the lab, but so we thawed this 35-year frozen sperm. We put it into the female who was synchronized to the right time of the cycle,
Okay.
and she carried the embryo and the fetus to term.
It's so funny when you say it, because every time you say it, it's like the timing had to be perfect. You know, you're looking at this, you know, you don't want to waste the sperm. Obviously, it's very valuable from a genetic diversity standpoint, plus like the age of it and just sort of the sensitivity of the process itself. And it's just amazing how this is what happened. We got a bison. Now, and the purpose of this program and many other programs at the zoo is to preserve genetic diversity, to preserve the species. So one of the things that the zoo does, and many other zoos in North America, is they team up and try to mate animals of the same species that have a optimal genetic diversity. So if they mated, they would, like, that offspring would have that optimal diversity, so that you can preserve the different genetic diversity. Can you talk about the importance of preserving that genetic diversity within a species?
Yeah, so I really like how you described that. We take a lot of care in how we pair the animals, so that
Right.
we make sure there's no inbreeding and they're genetically diverse. But the importance of genetic diversity is the long-term health of the population. So you need genetic diversity to be able to adapt to changing environments. You need genetic diversity to stay healthy, to have good immune systems, to combat disease and natural changes, or anthropogenic, so human-induced changes as
Right.
well. So yeah, genetic diversity is the foundation of long-term success.
Yeah, it's a conservation staple too, right? When
Right.
we talk about species diversity, we talk about community diversity, ecosystem diversity, but really down, when you get down to it, it's that genetic diversity to make sure that population could be stable. And I really appreciate the amount of work that you and your team have done, as well as your partners with the universities and Parks Canada have done to help preserve and help I guess conserve this population of bison, and hopefully one day, when that disease is eradicated in the wild, or it's gotten to a manageable point, the goal is to take the bison that do not have the disease in the zoo that you've been able to successfully breed, and put them into the wild. Is that correct?
Yeah, so ultimately, I mean, whether it's in the biobank or whether they're in managed settings like zoos, these animals are the insurance for those future reintroductions.
Right.
Now, sometimes reintroducing a species does not happen right away, because we've got to look after the habitat. We've got to make sure there's somewhere proper to put them back so that they
Yeah.
survive.
And with that too, there's another thing I learned at the zoo. It's the nutrition aspect, right? Is, can that population hold enough animals that will maintain that population? You don't want to repopulate if there's not enough food or not enough resources available for that species to survive. And there's a lot that goes in, a lot of calculations, a lot of theoretical biology that goes on to be able to understand that. And I think the nutrition department at the Toronto Zoo is very active in those calculations for other species that I think is just wonderful. Now let's get into and this is great. I really appreciate you coming on to talk about that, because that's what I wanted to get the audience to understand your background, your specialization and expertise. you obviously know that, and you've been already talking to the news about this new project, I guess. It's a company called Colossal. They've come out with an announcement that they've produced, quote unquote, 3 dire wolves. Now, the media and the marketing aspect of it, you have to respect it. They're coming out saying that these are dire wolves, and we've successfully de-extincted these 3. Like, we brought the dire wolf back. That's a lot of the for the first couple of days anyway, or even the first day, that was a lot of the titles on Time Magazine. I think it had extinct, and then they put a cross. They put a red highlight marker around it, and then they had the dire wolf there. Now, obviously, it's from well, actually, I should ask you from a scientific point of view. This is pretty phenomenal, right? Is this something that's like, this is incredible that we were able to do this as scientists, is to inject the dire wolf DNA into a gray wolf DNA and to be able to produce an animal that has dire wolf DNA. That's pretty incredible, right?
So obviously there's a lot of parts to this big picture here. The techniques that were done are very impactful, and obviously the funding and staffing resources at Colossal, they were able to ramp up these technologies very quickly, what might have taken a zoo or a university longer to do. So technologically speaking, these are very important advancements for science in general.
Right. Gotcha. Yeah. Now, one thing that I always find interesting, you mentioned like they had the resources, the financial resources to really accelerate that process. I looked up the number. It was $435 million. Mm-hmm. Now, we biologists salivate at that amount of money. You know what I mean? Because, as you well know, that goes a long way in conservation. Not restoration, but in conservation. It takes a lot of money. It always is more expensive when you restore a habitat or you restore a species, in this case, right? $435 million to get this thing started. Who knows how much it's going to cost for other species? And maybe that will get cheaper if this continues on. That's a topic that we'll talk about in a bit. But I feel as though that's a lot of money, but that could be put towards other things in conservation, which we'll get to in a little bit. But the science of it, you're right, I feel like it's pretty cool that we were able to do that. Now, the question I ask you, and you're like, I feel you have the expertise to really answer this, and I'm sure you've thought about a lot of the ethical ways and even the scientific ways of how do we consider this a dire wolf species, right? Because if you really think about the information that's come out that a lot of people probably know is that, this chain of DNA that the gray wolf has is probably like, 22 to 23,000 genes within the DNA. And this is an estimate. This is what I'm getting off of reports. I don't know for sure, but this is around the thing. They did like, I think it was either like 20 different changes to 14 genes or 14 different changes to 20 of those segments. So very, very small percentage of the gray wolf was altered, of the DNA, a gray wolf of the DNA was altered for dire wolf characteristics. From a scientific like taxonomy point of view, what do we consider? Is this considered like a new species or the dire wolf species? Are there like certain regulations or credentials that scientists follow that we would say, yes, this is a dire wolf species, or no, this is just a genetically altered gray wolf species?
So that is a very important question. And I think people need to understand the regulatory part of it and then can make up their mind. So, science is very methodical, and the definition of species, how years ago it was based on morphology, and we've moved away from that because we know that morphology doesn't give you the entire picture. So now we are using genetics to make sure that they're different species. It was 20 edits on 14 genes.
Thank you. I always get those mixed up.
Yeah, but minuscule.
Yeah.
It really is just genetic modification. It is not a new species. And if you think as an example, I have a Maltese at home.
Right.
My Maltese is not a Great Dane,
Right.
but I'll guarantee there's, 20 size and coat color edits between the Maltese and the Great Dane. Maybe 50, maybe 10. But to do morphology based changes, and then declare it a new species is not telling the full truth.
Right.
A species is much more complex than coat color and size.
And I think that's what they were, according to a lot of the PR and a lot of the articles that Colossal came out with. So not necessarily with where other scientists were like yourself or other experts were commenting on it. This is what they put out as their PR. You know, a lot of them saying, we just want to see if we could make a dire wolf, like, or a species that would express the dire wolf gene. So having, I think they said a mane or even being like 6 feet long, I think are some of the characteristics that they discussed. They never actually came out and said this is a dire wolf species. However, a lot of the media came out and saying, hey, the dire wolf is back. The dire wolf is back. And of course, the dire wolf is very popular in the Game of Thrones version. They even had George R.R. Martin, as part of the photo shoot. He even cried when he saw them, and they're beautiful puppies. Like, let's be honest, as animal lovers, you want to hug them and you want to play with them. However, there was, I think a lot of scientists are up in arms because, people are calling this, they brought back the dire wolf. That's not the case, correct? Is that, like, from a scientific point of view, they didn't bring back a dire wolf, right?
Correct. So one, to announce that, some really amazing lab experiments were done. Really what the advancement is the ability to edit more than one gene or loci at a time. So they made 20 edits at the same time. That's called multiplex gene editing. Spectacular. I mean, that is an advancement. The challenge scientists are having is to say that anything was resurrected or de-extincted, or even that it is a different species, is really, skewing the reality of what a species is.
Right.
So if we're going to, there's a pop culture involved here. You said it.
Yes.
This is Game of Thrones land, which I sadly didn't watch, but now I might go back and watch. But we are in the pop culture, and people want to call them dire wolves. So,
yes.
And from a pop culture stance, okay, that's fine. But from a scientific communication standpoint, we have to stay true to the science. So we do have to call them genetically modified organisms rather than a new species. Gotcha. They're genetically modified gray wolves.
Yeah, right. Gotcha. Now, I have to ask this as someone who works for the zoo, and the zoo is very, very big on not only having, scientists and experts, but also being able to communicate that science to the public, right? Every one of you at the staff there are very good at discussing about the animals, the different characteristics, their personalities of the animals that you have at the zoo, but also the work that you do, which is very complex. You have to have that ability to say that to a public audience that may or may not have the background, like a biology background or anything like a science background. And you guys are very good at doing what you do. Now, here's the question I pose to you. Okay. The media comes out saying dire wolves are back, right? De-extinct, everything like that. Scientists come out and be like, well, actually, hold on a second. Like, that's not the case in this particular point, but everybody's excited that this dire wolf is back, and this is the first time most of them have ever heard of this type of of this technology, this biotechnologies to bring this. So they get excited about that, especially in a news cycle that is, let's be honest, crap right now. Like, it's not very nice now. So we have this, like, scientists are I always feel like the scientists are like the parents of the public, where it's like, yeah, but it is kind of cool, but it's not quite the way it is. And they're all just like, you ruin everything. Like, it's almost that perception as a scientist where you have to say it because we're scientists, but also people are like, but dire wolves, like, we want dire wolves. How do you deal with that, where you can speak intelligently on the subject, but in a way where you're not seen as, downing this new sort of announcement?
Okay, that's a really important question. And I think that's what really good science communicators are about. And perhaps because we work in zoos and our goal is to educate, as well as doing science, we really focus on educating from like 2-year-olds to 72-year-olds.
Yeah.
We have to, master the span of the language. But I think what is really important is to celebrate the science. The
Mm,
science that was done needs to be celebrated in the sense that they are developing technologies that can be useful for many things. But then we need to stay true to science. And one of the reasons is because it is a very difficult time in the world now where, people are questioning what is being said in social media, on the internet. And if scientists don't stay true to the word, to the science, then it becomes a slippery slope for
yeah.
scientific integrity. So we celebrate what was done, but
Hmm.
but then we clearly state that we'd like to call these genetically modified gray wolves,
Right.
but we
Yeah.
celebrate how they got there.
Exactly. Yeah, and I agree with you. I think that's really important, especially from a public perception. Like we know scientists sometimes in the public are not really seen as the regular people that everybody that we are. And this is why I started the podcast, is to get to know people and how we behave and what our
Yeah.
likes and dislikes are, and then how we feel about certain topics like this. But it's also when we get an idea like this, there are not just the questions of this is great technology and this is really cool and we celebrate it, but there are a lot of thoughts from an ethical point of view of what
Mhm.
we're doing here. And I'd like to talk about this for the rest of the interview. And that is,
Yeah.
okay, so now we have these wolves, these genetically modified wolves with dire wolf genes in them. This means that there's genes in these wolves. We don't know if they're going to be dominant. We don't know if they're going to be recessive. We have no idea. They are in a 2,000 acre park or reserve that they're monitored by like 10 different people. And they're well secured according to the company, according to Colossal. Say they get out, right? This is what we're always worried as biologists and conservationists. We worry about Atlantic salmon being farmed in open pen
Yeah.
nets, and what if they get out? That's a concern that the aquaculture facilities as well as biologists and the government are all worried about. What if they get out? And what if they interact with gray wolves within their area, right? They're obviously in probably a similar habitat. That's why they're located. We don't know where they're located, but we know they're in northern US. What if that again, what if these animals start to interact and start to breed with these other animals? Could this, even though there's small amount of genes that are changed, could this affect the local population, especially as an invasive species?
Okay, so those are the things, when scientists are always not the fun ones at the party, is because we're always the ones calculating risk, right?
Yes,
In our
yes.
mind, calculating risk. So absolutely, this is not a different species. We know that they can interbreed with gray wolves. We know that even a really protected habitat, the chance of escape is always there. It's never 100%
Right,
foolproof.
right.
So this animal is larger, looks different. We actually, the laboratory experiments were not properly done to understand how the selective advantage. Will it outcompete gray wolves? Will the hybrids outcompete natural gray wolves? We actually, like the difference between an academic study where a lot of the checks and balances through the repeated laboratory experiments are done and the paper is published. This is a case where the pups were made, the moment is celebrated, but we actually don't have all the answers yet. So the word invasive species could be the reality. So, right now they're saying they're not slated for release,
Hmm.
but, the discussion is always there.
Yeah.
if the decision is made, 5, 10 years from now or 2 years from now, that there's a possibility of release, let us remember that there is no actual, border in the wild between
Right.
states, between
Right.
provinces. These
Yeah.
animals can get anywhere, and they are predators, so they're
Yeah.
top of the line.
Yeah, I mentioned breeding, but you're looking at affecting, prey
Great.
species and food for other, like that could affect the food availability for other wolves and so forth. So that's something I never really thought of, but obviously
Mhm.
something that you have to think about. And now, we don't know if they plan on making more. We don't know if
Yep.
this is an ongoing breeding program. So we'll let Colossal decide that and announce
Yep.
that in terms of, because we don't know that, but it's definitely a consideration. Obviously, if they continue to breed them, they're gonna have to do something with them. They can't just use a 2,000-acre park. Now, it would be cool if people could see them and people can look at them. I think, again, like just to see if they do express those genes later on in life as they become an adult, and see what this ancient species look like, or this 10,000-year-old species look like. I think it would be kind of an interesting thing from a scientific point of view, and definitely interesting um, for other people that are want to know more about animals. Now it's interesting. I was reading on the CBC article where Colossal, like the CEO Ben Lamb, says that the project started out 2 years ago to get people talking about endangered red wolf populations, and that they said with this technology they've actually used a less invasive technique it developed while working with dire wolves. They actually produced four cloned red wolves. Now, you are involved in a lot of in vitro fertilization and
Mhm.
taking those eggs and sperm and being able to do this. Now, this is an actual like present species that's endangered. Um, do they need to have the ability to get dire wolf expression in gray wolves to be able to reproduce red wolves? Like, are these two separate things that maybe they're using as a way? And I don't want to
Yep.
have you assume, because like, but we don't need the ancient DNA to produce clones of, you know, present day DNA, correct?
Correct, correct. And in fact, Toronto Zoo has red wolf sperm frozen in its cryobank. We were
Okay.
one of the original partners in the Red Wolf Project in the 90s and 2000s, where we were trying to develop artificial insemination programs. So we're kind of connected in the past.
Right.
But the red wolf is a species where we've got genetic diversity in the biobank, a number of males going back almost to the founders. So there's a lot of genetic diversity present. Think about that 35-year frozen bison calf.
Mm-hmm.
We can have 30-year-old frozen red wolf pups as well. So when you're looking at a species like red wolf, I don't see the need for these really high-end genetic editing technologies to ensure the genetic diversity of the red wolf
Gotcha.
right now.
Okay, and now we are going to go a little bit beyond the dire wolves now, because this company has also come out and said it has DNA, not intact DNA, but DNA from woolly mammoths, the thylacine, I think,
Mm-hmm.
which is the Tasmanian tiger, ancient species that have been extinct, and the dodo bird, which is pretty much the representative for all extinct species. It's part of that expression, the way of the dodo, meaning it's going out the window kind of thing. It's going to go extinct. These are other species, but the woolly mammoth is one that's interesting. A large animal. Obviously, people have been bringing it back in movies and cartoons, and it's an interesting animal, obviously, because the elephant is such an iconic animal present day, that the woolly mammoth becomes iconic as well from an ancient perspective. They say that they are on their way to actually producing a woolly mammoth. Now, woolly mammoths like environments that are very similar to Canadian environments.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, where do they like? I guess the question is, like, where do they plan on putting these animals? I know this is a company that's U.S. based, and then maybe they try and put it northern part. But we're talking about dire wolves. We're talking about woolly mammoths. And I'm not sure about the Tasmanian tiger or the dodo, but these are both animals that like cold areas, like colder temperatures. Woolly mammoth, I'm going to go out and say tundra, Arctic tundra, like very
Mm-hmm.
like colder animals. Obviously, they had the fur on them. Um, I guess the question is one, where are we going to put them? And is it right to bring them back during a time where the earth is warming? Like, you know what I mean? Like, we're in unprecedented warming due to humans. Is it ethically right to bring these animals back in such a bad situation?
So again, these are really great questions. With the dire wolf and the woolly mammoth, we're talking about two species that had a native range in what is present day Canada.
Right. Okay.
So that's why we should be paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
Because they would do very well in our ecosystems up here. The tricky thing is that the environment today in the north or across Canada is not what it was in the ice age when they were last here. It is a different ecosystem. And so not knowing the gene edits that will be done to create the woolly mammoth or the full dire wolf, we really don't have an understanding of how they're going to perform in today's environment. And remember, you earlier on had said about like our nutrition team understanding the nutrition, not
Yes.
only in human care, but in the wild. So
Mm-hmm.
what is left for them? What truly will they eat? Not only to, we say in the zoo world, it's not about just surviving, it's about thriving.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
you don't want to release them to the wild to hang on, like to barely
Right.
survive. They need to
Right.
be able to thrive and build population. So
Yeah.
can we offer that?
Yeah.
I don't think we know yet.
Well, and even thinking, here's my marine biology brain going off here. You got a polar bear population who is suffering because they can't be on ice floats as much because of the melting sea ice, so they can't hunt as what they used to be. So now there's evidence to show that they are spending more time on land to try and find berries and food, and but there's not much in the Arctic in terms of that. Now, if you put a woolly mammoth in the Arctic, those polar bears might thrive just from hunting woolly mammoth. I don't know if that's going to happen or if that would ever happen, but that might actually save that species. Now, of course, I do this in jest because, you just think like out of the box kind of thing. But we are not bringing back species to help other species because we can't control what happens in nature. And I think humans are often thought to have doing, like, we've done that in the past, and it's failed miserably with invasive species and introducing species that we shouldn't have, and it affecting the rest of the environment. So even though we understand more of the intricacies of food webs and so forth, I feel like it's difficult to do that kind of thing. But yeah, from an ethical standpoint, looking at, there's so many things to address. Hopefully, Colossal has some answers as this story develops. It made a big splash. I think we're starting to see a lot more articles come out where scientists are giving their 2 cents, like yourself and like other people, like University of Manitoba. I don't have the name offhand right now, but I'll provide it soon. But the people there are coming in and providing their scientific opinions and being like, this is what we need to think about. There's ethical questions, there are environmental questions that we need to think about. And so I think it's really interesting. Overall, from you, from your perspective, personally and scientifically, is this something like, what do you think about all of this? Like in terms of obviously we know what you think about in terms of the science. It's really interesting that they're able to do multiple different segments and gene expressions, which I think is really, obviously I agree with you, it's really cool.
Yep.
But with the whole press release, with the whole idea of de-extinction, what are your thoughts on that from a scientific point of view, this whole thing?
I'm a biotechnologist by training, right? Those of us in reproductive technology, we're biotechnologists. And as much as I've spent my entire career working in biotechnology, what I'm realizing is that we have to connect humans to nature. The way for us to stay healthy, like the planetary health, global health, One Health, the way for humans, animals, plants, and the environment to continue to be healthy is that we have to connect to it. And I think by giving us an out, this type of synthesized nature, whether we're synthesizing animals or plants or, aquatics or things in the sky. It's an easy out. It doesn't necessarily connect people to nature, and
Right.
that's the one thing that I think we're missing to create that nature positive world. The red wolf is still having problems, not because we didn't set up a cryobank, but because humans refuse to live with them. And we're shooting them, poisoning them, and there was roadkill and
Right.
other challenges. So like it's time for humans to step up and
Yeah.
not think that there's a tech out, an
Right.
easy out. Technology is going to give us an easy out.
And I feel as though, having these cryobanks, having the ability to repopulate is a tool in the conservation tool belt, but it's not the tool that we need to think. We're not just going to start producing and then do whatever we want with these animals. That's not what we do. We want to make sure that we conserve what we have right there and not affect the rest of the environment. And if we could reproduce them and help species, that's great. But it's a species that's living today, having intact DNA, right?
Exactly. The key word in reproductive technology is assisted reproductive technology. It's to assist as needed, not to create from scratch.
Gotcha. Now I have to ask this question because everybody in the comments, every time they see something when it comes to cryogenic labs and bringing back species, and this is for fun, how close are we to Jurassic Park?
Not in my lifetime.
Bringing back I mean, we're able to bring back the woolly mammoth. Are we able to bring back dinosaurs? Is that like with bird DNA, like with birds? Are we able to do that?
You know what? My understanding is that perhaps the DNA is just too fragmented.
Ah, gotcha.
So again, Colossal is developing the steps to get there, but I think we're talking about species where we just don't have enough intact DNA.
Gotcha. Well, that's really great. Gabby, this has been fantastic. Again, I really appreciate you doing this on such short notice and bringing your scientific expertise and your personal expertise. I really appreciate all the work that you do for the zoo and what you've been doing for conservation and coming on here and giving our audience a great perspective on what's been happening with these direwolves and Colossal. And thank you so much. I'd love to have you back on the podcast again.
Wonderful. I'll take up the invitation, and in return, I want to thank you for sharing these stories. I think it's important for everyone to have a deep understanding and then be able to form their own thoughts.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm going to tell this to people. I know I have a lot of people who, listen across the world, but if you're ever in Toronto, go visit the Toronto Zoo, talk to the zookeepers. They know a lot about these animals, and they can talk a lot about the cryogenics lab. They can talk a lot about the research on not only the conservation, but the welfare of the animals. You guys do a great job in communicating that, and I really appreciate it. So for all the audience members, if you're coming to Toronto, let me know and I'll come with you, and we'll be able to talk all about that. So thank you again, Gabby. Really appreciate it, and we'd love to have you back on.
Excellent. Have a great day. Thanks.
You too. Thank you, Gabby, for joining us on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. It was great to have you on. Great to be able to answer those questions. I hope you're listening to this and saying, hey, you know what? Like, I'm an audience member. I come here to hear about the ocean, to hear about science. This is an interesting science news piece because it was worldwide. In a time where the news cycle sucks and we're always hearing about disappointing news, this is kind of something that was like, hey, you know what? This is cool news. This is something interesting. It's something that you can talk to people about in a positive way. And I wanted to make sure that you had all the resources and understood all of the implications of a significant achievement like this. And I think that's what I wanted to do for today's episode, is just to give you the information. And Gabby obviously had an amazing expertise background. She brought the information like no other. And I'm really happy that I got to have her on the podcast. I asked her yesterday and she did it like today. Today's Wednesday. I'm going to release this on a Friday, but I asked her on a Tuesday. She says, yes, I'm available. And she was able to do this. And not only did she did it in such great fashion. So I really appreciate Gabby for being on the show and for bringing us the information that we needed to know about these direwolves or these genetically modified gray whales. So, and answering the questions and talking about questions around marketing and PR for these types of species. And people are like, hey, we brought the direwolves back, and but it's not really a direwolf from a scientific point of view. And there are scientific regulations and functions that we have to follow around naming certain species or coming up with a different species. Just because they may look like a different species doesn't mean genetically they are a different species. And I really loved how Gabby highlighted that aspect, that we used to base species on morphology, but we don't do that anymore because we have the genetic material or ability to read the genetic material. Now we look at it, how diverse they are from genetics. And look, this happens every once in a while where we see, we see species like, say, fish species that we think are a large population, and then we do the genetic comparison of different like subpopulations, and we find out that one population is genetically different from another population. That could be because they were isolated 100 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago geographically, and so they came up with their own genetic mutations and they started to develop that way and evolve that way. But morphologically, like outside, they look the same. So we just assumed that they were the same. And when we categorize based on morphology, we categorize it the same way. Now we're being able to look at the genetic material and understanding that when we compare them, some of them are different. We look at, are they new species? And is that new species a species at risk because they don't have the population numbers to say, hey, we're a healthy population? We have to find out more about that. And it incurs more research. It inspires more research. It demands more research to be able to make sure that we protect that species. So this gets into a whole another side of biology, a whole another side of genetics and conservation biology. And I think it's extremely important to talk about, something that we don't talk about on this podcast at all. This is the first time we've really talked about it. And I'm really happy that Gabby was able to join us. And I hope you got what you came for. I hope you got the information that you needed to say, hey, when people talk to you, it's like, hey, I was listening to this podcast. This is what they said they had an expert on. It's a cool thing that they're able to modify, multiple genes at once and express it into an animal. But there's also a lot of questions and implications from this and what we're going to do in the future. I think that's something, the questions that become interesting, and what they're going to do with these species and how often are they going to be, reproducing these species? Is this just 3 dire wolves and that's cool? Or are they going to be producing more? What are we going to do with those? Where are they going to go? All these questions need to be answered in time, of course. But I'd love to hear your opinion on what's happening. Like the story, the way they came out with the story, the naming of a dire wolf compared to a genetically modified gray wolf. Do you even care? I would love to know your opinion. Hit me up in the comments below if you're watching this on YouTube, or of course you can always contact me on Instagram at How to Protect the Ocean. That's at How to Protect the Ocean. But thank you again for Gabby. Thank you for listening to this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, from the True North, Strong and Free. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.